We know a lot of things about the National Football League, but one of them is most certainly that they love a head coaching search. We got all that and much more for you on today's episode of the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look at the NFL on the field and in the front office with elite breakdowns to next-level analysis and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome into another episode of the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. We are your hosts, Matt Williamson, former NFL scout, myself, Ross Jackson, NFL expert here on the Locked On Podcast Network, filling in for Brian Peacock. On today's episode of the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show, we're going to take a look at some firings across the league, including one that our very own Matt Williamson called just about last week. So we'll dive into that one, Matt. We'll also take a look at Tyreek Hill, who is so ready to be out of Miami that he changed his social media image. Matt doesn't know what it looks like yet. Yeah, I'm going to tell him, and we'll get that reaction live. And then we're going to take a look at, of course, the NFL coaching carousel, which is, of course, drawing a lot of eyes around the league. We're going to dive into all that today. We appreciate you very much for making us your first listen and for being everydayers here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at FanDuel. It's your chance to win $250 in bonus bets as a new customer. All you got to do is win your first $5 bet. Just head over to FanDuel.com to get started. Matt, the NFL loves a coaching search. We're watching some big names already find their way to interviews with some big teams. I want to kind of take a look at some of the bigger names, but let's start here, Matt. Only 5 head coach openings so far. I'm a little bit surprised by that. Are you?
Yeah, I thought, usually Monday is pretty brutal. Heads roll left and right. You knew it was coming. I thought we'd get to 8, maybe 7 at a minimum, and I'm not sure that we won't. It's still
a chance.
It's
still time.
Tuesday. We're not into June yet. It's Tuesday. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the ones that, of course, we're going to be watching very closely over the course of next week is Dallas Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy. His contract expires on the 14th. That gives the team and him a little bit of time to do some kind of exclusive conversations amongst the two, but then an opportunity potentially beyond that if they decide to let that contract expire and then move on. So definitely a big name to watch. Speaking of big names to watch, Matt, just looking across the NFL, to no one's surprise, the 3 big names that we're seeing everywhere: Ben Johnson, Aaron Glenn, Mike Vrabel. Let's start off with Ben Johnson. Ben Johnson, the offensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions. We spoke a little bit about him yesterday and how good that fit feels for him over in Jacksonville. And, well, he's early on Jacksonville's list.
Yeah, I like the fit quite a bit. Just because I think Lawrence has so much untapped potential. And, frankly, if you look at the final stats or EPA or DVOA of the Jacksonville offense this year, half of the year was with Mac Jones. It wasn't that terrible. It really wasn't. And if you could put his, panache on it and maybe do a little bit on defense, I don't think they're that far off. That owner has shown that he will spend. They don't have the best home field advantage in the world, and they go overseas a bunch, but I don't think that division's all that scary. I think it's a pretty prime job. And if you could get Lawrence back from a C+ player to a B+ player, it's probably 5 more wins a year.
Yeah. And look, and the other thing that franchise has shown, and this ownership group has already shown, is that they can build a championship level defense. I think a lot of people forget that when they made that AFC championship run years ago, that wasn't because of Blake Bortles. That was on the back of that defense. And Blake Bortles was a really fun part of all of the equation. Don't get me wrong. But that was a lot of what they built with that defense. So imagine that they can build that defense again and get extended play out of, or let's say improved play out of Trevor Lawrence with an improved offensive system and attack. I think that's absolutely a big one. Could you see Doug Peterson potentially drawing some interest elsewhere? His name has kind of been whispered about here in New Orleans. I'm curious about what you think on that.
Full disclosure, one of the hardest things of my job, our jobs, is talking coaching hires, especially when we talk about assistant coaches, because I've been inside the walls and it goes a long way. Like we talked about Mayo. Now, I just want to take a step back and talk about him real quick, because I heard some people talking that made a lot of sense, that the Kraft family wanted Mayo to succeed more than anybody out there. You know, I mean, like they handpicked him, and you wonder, was it day to day? Did he just seem like he was in over his head? You know, I mean, on game day he didn't. They didn't have any good players, but the Kraft family must have thought so, or thought they could upgrade. You know, so that's just one example of I've been around coaches. Sometimes the tight end coach is brilliant, and no one would ever have a clue. You know what I mean? Like that type of thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
but
no, good call. Good call.
The impression I've got with Peterson is he wouldn't mind getting away from the game. You know, like I mean, you know, he's done a lot. I'm sure he's got a lot of money in the bank. But I also wonder no doubt. I mean, but I wonder at his stage of his career, he's not Belichick. I mean, he can't just step back and be like, I'll be back next year. I mean, I wonder if he'd be done if he hangs it up this year and goes hits the beach, you know?
Yeah, really good point. Really good point. Yeah, he's an interesting one to watch, and the Jerome Mayo one's really interesting too because the Patriots kind of talked about how they felt like they had regressed under Jerome Mayo. I don't know how you feel that way considering what you were last year, and you won the same amount of games. I don't know. It seems strange, but sure, whatever, whatever that is. Let's look at Aaron Glenn here. Aaron Glenn, 4 of the 5 openings have already reached out to him. Basically, everybody but the Patriots he has an interview scheduled with. So that's the Jets, the Jaguars, of course, the New Orleans Saints, which I'm hearing that interview is probably going to be on Friday is what we're expecting so far. And then he's basically going to pile all these in from Thursday till Saturday is what Ian Rappaport's report was. And of course, the Chicago Bears are in that number as well. No surprise here, I imagine, for you on this one, right? It's crazy, isn't it?
Like, this guy's, you know, the number 1 seed trying to win the Super Bowl. And I know the head coach isn't going to look at the coordinators, you know, sideways, but like we got something to deal with here, you know?
Yeah, we're busy, man.
Right. We got stuff to do. We don't even know our opponent, but we can work on our zone blocking or whatever, you know, like there's stuff we can do. You know, you can watch some tape, right? And as opposed to traveling all over or zooming all over, but no shock at all on Glenn. Comparing the two, which is really hard to do again from afar. I kind of trust him more as players coach, less nerdy. You know what I mean? He recently he was a defensive back. He hit people. We saw him, you know, play football and get himself dirty. You know, like I thought Campbell did a great job of getting recent former players, Deuce Staley, Antoine Randall, relate really well to players. And that's not a knock on the offensive coordinator. I just don't know as much about his background in terms of standing in front of 53 players and being the CEO. Yeah.
No, that's true. I think
more in that regard.
Yeah. I think I would side with you on that. I think I'm with you on that. I mean, that's just one of those things where he feels like he's kind of ready to do. He's been doing different versions of that for so long. He feels like that leader of men, right? That's what everybody wants as a head coach. He's probably one of the ones that you don't have to ask that question about. I think you're having to ask that question right now about some of these other guys. Like you think about like Liam Cohen and Bobby Slowick and some of these other guys that are coming from those coordinator positions. That's going to be the big question about them. Are they those rah-rah big leader of men types? And if they're not, is that really what you want as a head coach? I don't know. Like you said in yesterday's episode, every organization operates differently. So we'll see who likes what. But yeah, I think for me, I want the guy that's going to be able to inspire some leadership for sure. And maybe there's
Ross,
nobody.
You know my background. I've seen 3 head coaches my whole life, and none of them were, you know, the guru X's and O quarterback developer.
Right.
You know, they're tough guy, leader of men. But then you lose offensive coordinator after offensive coordinator. You know, I mean, if you're good at hiring them, then you have to go.
Yeah, it's a risk. It's the risk, and I'll tell you what. I'd rather rehire the offensive coordinator than rehire the head coach any day. Absolutely. And so that's kind of the way that I look at it for sure. And you look at this year's playoffs, right? I mean, several teams, Tomlin included, but you look at Dan Quinn, you look at Sean McDermott, and others. These are all guys that are not play callers. These are all guys that are head coach. And then they have the coordinators handling the play calling. So maybe we're seeing a little bit of a shift in that trend. Speaking of leaders of men, let's bring this over a little bit, Matt, and take a look at Mike Vrabel here next, because he's, of course, another hot name so far in this quarterback carousel. And then we're going to take a look at everything going on with Tyreek Hill, which is never nothing when it comes to Tyreek Hill. We got that coming for you next as we continue on with the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of the Peacock Williamson NFL Show brought to you by friends over at PrizePicks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. It's super easy. This isn't a situation to where you're having to build out your lineups and having to deal with injuries every week and shift things out and try different stuff. It's not the daily formats where you're going up against a bunch of mystery lineups either. It's you and your knowledge of your favorite sport, your favorite teams, and your favorite players against the house. PrizePicks will set a projection for individual players. Let's say Saquon Barkley, 1 total touchdown. You come in and you choose more or less. You do that for 2 to 6 players. You get some of those right. You go up to 1,000 times your entry because PrizePicks is just giving it all away here over the course of the holiday season. So we got that and much more for you over at PrizePicks every single day. Make sure you go and check them out. All you got to do is download the PrizePicks app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. It's going to get you $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup on the PrizePicks app with promo code LOCKEDONNFL. Once again, it is PrizePicks. Run your game. All right, everybody, continuing on with the Peacock Williamson NFL Show. Matt, we were talking about some of these head coaching candidates and how much the NFL loves a head coaching search. I think you could see it now. They could do a special with this, right? And
there should be Hard Knocks coaching special or whatever, right?
Yeah. Easy, right? We should be, kind of like how they do the schedule release, right? Black Monday, just go live and wait for everything to happen. Like, I don't know. I feel like
Survivor.
Maybe it's just what we'll do at Locked On next year. We'll make a Survivor thing out of it, and we'll have a ton of fun with it. Then we can come back around and we can do the Bachelor version as people are getting hired. There we go. That's how we'll handle it.
Ross, real quick, I just wanted to kind of just give a little antidote that I always like to tell people this time of year. So the year I was with the Browns, we were basically the worst team in the league. We ended up earning the 3rd pick in the draft, and Butch Davis got fired halfway through the season. We had an interim head coach, but it got really interesting. Like, as the season goes on, all the assistant coaches' doors started closing. They're on the phone with other teams and their buddies. You know what I mean? Like, it used to be open door, come on in, stop by, and then as the season goes on more and more, it's like, boy, there's a lot of closed doors down the offensive hallway here. Wonder what's happening,
I love that. And I think that's one of those things that you start seeing. Everybody's kind of checking in, like, hey, how's everything going over there? Like, hey, things aren't so great over here.
Remember when we played together at Fresno State 10 years ago, and now you're with the Cowboys? Right,
That's right, yeah. Oh, my goodness, yeah. Oh, that's wild. That must have been kind of eerie at the same time, too, right? Like, to walk down that hallway and feel like, oh, I used to talk to that guy. I used to talk to this person.
I don't feel like I can just stop in there right now,
Yeah. Things are not great. We were talking about the sort of qualifier of a head coach as being a leader of men and things like that. Matt, I don't know if anybody checks the box more when it comes to that by reputation than Mike Vrabel right now in terms of this coaching cycle. Yeah. And so right now, his name has been mentioned with the Chicago Bears, the New Orleans Saints, the New England Patriots, and the New York Jets. So basically, so far, everybody but the Jaguars at the time that we're recording this. That might change. But looking at that, like Mike Vrabel, what is it about him that makes him so appealing for whether it's specifically for these teams or for any team in the NFL? And you said in yesterday's episode, I want to make sure we say this again, that you think he might be one of the 20 best coaches in the NFL. So what does that for you?
I think he has very good attention to detail in terms of situational football that he clearly got from Belichick. We know that, late in the game in this weird instance, we're not going to be overwhelmed with, whatever the down and distance is, or there's only 30 seconds on the clock and that type of thing. Clearly, he has a tough guy, Campbell mentality, former player too, and kind of looks that part. He stands in front of the room and everybody takes notice. I think there's something to be said for that too. No offense to like McDonald in Miami, but I think you have to overcome that in a very masculine world if you're a smaller guy. I mean, I know that's a weird thing to say, but I do think there is.
No, but that's a real thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I hit that sled too, and that type of thing, or I broke that collarbone, all that type of thing. Relate to a 23-year-old guy, An interesting thing about him, and it's mostly good, is if he had 2 really good offensive coordinator hirings with Tennessee. I mean, he hired LaFleur, who went on to be a head coach, and then he hired Arthur Smith, who went on to be a head coach. And then the third one, he didn't. Like, at least he has a track record, though, because if you're going to hire Vrabel, I need a really high quality X's and O's quarterback developer, offensive mind. and at least he has a track record of picking good ones, at least 2 in a row. I think that's a good foundation as well. I also drafted by the Steelers, played for the Patriots a majority of his career too. Those are good bones,
Yeah. No, not a bad evaluation of him at all. And I'm sure that a lot of these NFL teams are super excited about what they could potentially do with that. And it's so, I want to be careful how I say this because it's not easy, but let's just say that the swing rate for nailing the really good offensive coordinator is pretty high, right? Because you have so many good options to go and find that guy, so it's not it would not, I imagine, be a terribly hard situation to go ahead and fill out.
Last note on him too, I just wanted to mention earlier was I never thought the Titans were the most talented team in the league. They were a 1 seed 1 year. Tannehill is fine, but he's not Mahomes or Allen or Lamar. They were always division winners, multiple game winners with good, not great talent.
Yeah. I think one of the ones that also drives home your point about him just being that guy that knows everything, right? That's like smarter, attention to detail, all those other things. You remember the Titans and Patriots game where he kept running the clock out by taking the delay a game and then the false start so that he could do the delay a game again? Perfect example. Loophole, outside of 5 minutes. And just knowing the rule book.
Was proud on the other sideline. Wish I would have done that. Yeah, right.
Proud. He might have been proud later. I don't think he was proud at the moment.
Kind of brilliant.
Let's shift gears from coaches that could potentially landing in new places. Let's look at players that could potentially be landing in new places. Tyreek Hill over with the Miami Dolphins, just to kind of set this up in case you missed it. Basically told everybody that he's out the door. He's looking ahead to free agency, all this kind of stuff. Told reporters this after a game. Mike McDaniel, the head coach, was asked about it in his presser and kind of said, I'm not going to put a lot of stock into emotional moments right after a game and not making the playoffs and things like that. Smart response by Mike McDaniel there. But Tyreek Hill has taken it a step further, Matt, and he has changed his Twitter or X profile photo to his face superimposed over the body of a shirtless Antonio Brown running out of the stadium, throwing up the deuces at halftime during a game as a Tampa Bay Buccaneer years ago. And so Tyreek Hill has made it very painfully obvious that he wants to be headed elsewhere. We don't see things like this, but this is now you look at DJ Reed after the New York Jets game 2 weeks ago, saying effectively the same thing. I'm looking forward to free agency. I'm 1 foot out the door. That's not typically the culture that you expect to be building in the NFL.
I think times are changing quickly. Players realize they have more power. They have less. They realize that they have a very short shelf life, and I'm not going to withstand awful years. I know this wasn't Joe Thomas's style, but he's the best tackle of his generation and never played the playoff game. You know what I mean? That's rough. Right. That's real rough. And frankly, if things start going south for the Browns, as Myles Garrett, he's even had some rumblings. There's Garrett Wilson with the Jets, and I totally get it. And I wish I had a better, grasp on other sports. I'm so focused, but it seems like in the NBA, you can kind of talk yourself out of teams, and Major League Baseball as well. And,
Yeah, funny you should say that. There was a story just a couple of days ago in the NBA, Jimmy Butler of the Miami Heat saying during a press conference, not alone in a locker or in a locker room in a one-on-one conversation, during a press conference. Yeah, during a press conference talking about heading elsewhere, and now all of a sudden he's suspended, and all this just trade talks about that. So it does feel very NBA-ish situation like this.
Yeah, was Devontae Adams really that injured with the Raiders his last week or two before he got traded? You know what I mean? We're seeing a lot of this. Now, back to Hill, and I do think we're going to see a lot of trades this offseason. I could probably come up with a list of 15 big name, everyone knows type of players that could be had. Now, Tyreek's interesting because if you trade for him, it's not that bad of a cap hit for you. It's only $10 million. But I do think you're probably buying his worst years. That doesn't mean they're terrible. A year ago, he's not quite the player he was. Mm-hmm. And with him, first off, I would never associate myself with Antonio Brown. I've been around AB. I know people that know him well. I don't think that's the best career move in terms of,
good call.
I'm starting to change teams. I had a lot of success with the Steelers. I had a lot of success with the Chiefs. Then I got moved, and then I'm going to change another team. And then my feet are going to freeze and my helmet doesn't fit right. And then I'm like, that's not who I would associate myself with, except for on the field activities. But you can see some similarities in that, to be frank, I think everybody knows this. Tyreek Hill was not on most teams' draft boards coming out of college because he was a bad boy. You know, I mean, he was a character reject for most teams. And the Chiefs will take some shortcuts on that, and it's worked out great for them. And Andy Reid hands it well. I mean, I'm not giving them a hard time at all. And I do find it interesting though that this is the first bad year he's ever had in the NFL, and they were like a game away from the playoffs. So they weren't 2-15, and all of a sudden I got to go. You know, like there's worse situations in Miami. Be careful what you wish for. You can end up on the Raiders like AB did. You know.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's not a great situation or it's not that it's a terrible situation that you're trying to avoid here. And the circumstances to which that team was held with the quarterback injuries and all those other things, and you know, the Skylar Thompson days and everything, like those are reasons where you kind of go like, yeah, okay, I can see why they dropped a couple of games, but it wasn't an awful season despite all of that. I got to agree with you there. What a wild story. So we'll continue to update you as that one continues to develop. We'll see.
He's under contract. He's not like Reed.
He's not just going to leave.
Resign here. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So we'll see exactly where things go with Tyreek Hill. And of course, we'll keep you up to date here every day on the Peacock Williamson NFL Show. Up next, we're going to take a look at a couple of other firings around the NFL. It's not just coaches that are seeing the axe. And one of them, our good friend here, Matt Williamson, called just last week. Let's dive into it as we continue on with today's episode of the Peacock Williamson NFL Show, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, the number one sportsbook across America. You're looking at some really fun lines this weekend. You've got the Baltimore Ravens heavy favorites over the Pittsburgh Steelers at 9.5. You've got the Minnesota Vikings just 1.5 point favorites over the Los Angeles Rams. They travel to LA as a 14-win wildcard team. What a wild situation that is. And you've got the Chargers 2.5 favored on the road up against the Houston Texans. So some good matchups and some good lines to check out, especially some of those heavy favorites as well. If you feel really good about any one of those and you're a first-time customer of FanDuel, it's a great time to go and check one of those out. Take the money line, something like that, because you put $5 down as your first bet. Win that first bet, you can get $250 in bonus bets right away. Then you can use that on player props, live betting, bunch of different stuff over at FanDuel. So go and check them out today. It's FanDuel.com. That's where you're going to want to go to get started. FanDuel.com for your chance at $250 in bonus bets. It's FanDuel.com, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Matt, let's wrap it up here. Take a look at two big moves that also happened around the NFL. Let's start with the one that you called. That would be Indianapolis Colts defensive coordinator Gus Bradley. One of the things that you said last week is that moving on from Shane Steichen, moving on, changing at head coach maybe isn't the route to go. But if they don't do that, that making some changes over the defensive side would make a lot of sense. Here's the very beginning of that. Gus Bradley out in Indianapolis. What do you take from this move? And if you want to rehash a little bit, why is this move so important in terms of maybe creating some success for Indianapolis?
Yeah, I think we nailed this one. I think just in terms of personnel, there's a lot in place on offense. We could talk quarterback aside, and I threw out Fields or somebody like that could be a challenge to Richardson. But I really think on the other side of the ball, they got outdated. I mean, they were more of a cover 3 Legion of Boom team than anyone in the league. And if you're going to pull that off, you better have Earl Thomas and Sherman and Wagner. And, it's an execution-based defense that everyone has beaters for at this stage. And they just never adjusted. And I think that a change needed to be made. And by all accounts, he's very popular. I guess him and Steichen are like best friends, and so it's a hard move to make. But I'm sure ownership said, well, you got to make this move, and I kind of saw it coming, and we talked about it, almost a week ago. Yeah. It would be a very heavy defensive offseason for me if I'm those guys. You have some pieces in place, but I want to use most of my resources on defense.
Now you have
whoever the new guy is.
Yeah, you have a real opportunity here too. I mean, look, when you change that defensive coordinator, you're typically changing the entire defensive scheme. I mean, look at what the Washington Commanders did, right? Washington Commanders struggled on defense last year. They get Dan Quinn, who of course isn't calling the defense, but is a defensive minded guy. They returned one starter on the defensive side of the football from 2023 to 2024, and they're in the playoffs. Now, I'm not saying that can happen for Indianapolis, but I certainly won't say that it can't happen for Indianapolis in a very winnable AFC South, as you pointed out when we were talking about the Jaguars job earlier. So this idea of replacing the defensive coordinator really opens up an endless amount of paths in terms of how you structure your team, how you schematically approach the game on the defensive side. Opens up a lot of possibilities, I imagine.
I think so. And I would imagine you go pretty different. You know, I don't think you promote from within. I think you go get someone from outside the organization, maybe a blitz happy guy, something that's totally different. You know, I mean, and I do think they can find players in Indianapolis. They're a height, weight, speed team, you know, in a big way. And they do have some pieces. So I think it's intriguing, and I think it's the right move to make.
Yeah. Blitz happy teams, by the way, if you're looking and wondering where they could potentially go, you're looking at teams like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, very high blitz rate. The Minnesota Vikings, very high blitz rate. Yep. I mean, anybody. Brian Flores, anywhere that he goes, he's blitzing his head off. So, I mean, anybody from any of those staffs, if you want to be more aggressive, you can find that. I believe that one of the people that they're interviewing is the defensive coordinator from the New England Patriots. This happens sometimes when a team moves on from a head coach. They let some of the other guys go and look at lateral moves across the league. That could be one to watch here as those openings continue to fill up. Also in the AFC South, Ran Carthon, I almost said defensive coordinator, the general manager of the Tennessee Titans, is out. And you feel like this one came down to roster building or maybe hires? Like, what do you make of this Tennessee Titans move?
I was a little shocked. I mean, it was
really surprising, wasn't it? That's probably the better question. It was surprising, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's a first-year head coach, and obviously things didn't go well. You earned the first overall pick. And I think over the last 2 years, they've drafted Skoronski and Sweat and Latham, and they're trying to rebuild this offensive line. What I don't remember was he there for the A.J. Brown trade that turned into Treylon Burks that Vrabel lost his mind with?
That's a good one.
Is that his first move or not? And I will say, though, I was critical of the Titans this offseason, though, because I think as an organization, and probably starting with Carthon, they misjudged themselves because they were very active with their spending this past free agency period, you know, and going and getting guys like Snead and Ridley. And I got the impression they thought they were Pollard. You know, I thought they thought, man, we're one off season away of opening our wallets to being a contender. And when you do that, you better not earn the first pick in the draft. Owners don't like that.
Yeah, for sure. And that might have been one of John Robinson's final moves. His general manager was trading away AJ Brown. But look, I mean, when you walk into a situation where like that has taken place, you have to imagine that like that stink kind of lingers for a little while. And if you start doing anything that starts to remind you of that previous general manager, sometimes that can get held against you, even though it's not entirely fair. But if you start showing some of those same traits, they might want to dip a little bit earlier than later. Try to be a year early than a year late, you know?
And maybe this is unfair to Carthon too, but I mean, if you have the first overall pick in the draft, chances are you're going to take a quarterback. And I just think that ownership wants to make sure you get that right. And really the only guy he drafted was Levis, which was the first pick in the second round. That's not the first pick in the first round. Sure. And he didn't get that right. You know, you don't get many opportunities to draft your franchise quarterback over and over, you know?
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Which quarterback do you feel like fits for them at one if they go quarterback? I mean, it's Shador or it's Cam, right? It's got to be one of those two guys.
I would imagine, and I'll be full disclosure, I'm probably on step 3 of 10 in my draft prep, you know, and I'm baby stepping into it. I'm going to go to the Senior Bowl. I'm doing it on the side, like a side project. But from what I've seen, I like Cam better. I just think there's more upside there. More, I don't know that this is rough because I haven't studied him and I changed my name. But if his last name is Jackson or Williamson, I'm not sure Sanders is as enticing. You know what I mean?
That's fair. That's fair. I'm a Shador guy, but I'm also very early in my process too. So we'll continue that conversation later on down the road.
I won't pretend to know. These are not my final answers. Yeah.
That's fair. That's fair. All right, John, we appreciate you very much for joining us for another episode of the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. We've got more for you tomorrow. We're getting closer and closer to Wild Card Weekend. Ezekiel Elliott is a loss Los Angeles Charger. There's so many things to continue to cover, along with the head coaching searches around the league as well. So we got all that coming up for you, and we hope that you'll join us again tomorrow. Matt Williamson, you can follow him on Twitter at Williamson NFL. You can find me at Ross Jackson-Nola. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Make sure you're here, as we are here for you every single day, covering the biggest stories around the National Football League here on the Peacock Williamson NFL Show, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.